Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The fluorescent lights of the university library buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting harsh shadows across Ava Thompson's exhausted face as she hunched over her medical textbooks at 2:47 a.m. Her dark eyes, rimmed with fatigue but still burning with fierce determination, scanned the pages of advanced pharmacology. While her stomach growled in protest, she'd skipped dinner again to save every precious dollar for her grandmother's medication. "Ava, sweetheart, you need to come home." The voice of Mrs. Martinez from the night cleaning crew broke through her concentration. "Your grandmother's been asking for you." Ava's heart clenched. Grandmother Lillian had been asking for her more frequently lately, the Huntington's disease stealing precious memories and moments faster than Ava could hold on to them. At 22, Ava had already lost her parents in a car accident and was watching the only person left in her world slowly fade away, one neural pathway at a time. "Just 5 more minutes," Ava whispered, though they both knew she'd been saying that for the past hour. She couldn't afford to fall behind in her pre-med studies, not when every grade, every scholarship, every opportunity was a step closer to finding a cure for the disease that was devouring her family's legacy. The walk home through Chicago's South Side was a familiar dance of shadows and streetlights. Ava pulled her threadbare coat tighter against the October wind, her mind racing through the day's lectures while mentally calculating their remaining savings. $43. That would cover Grandmother Lillian's medication for exactly 4 more days. "Ava, my angel." Grandmother Lillian's voice was weaker now, her hands trembling as Ava helped her sip water. "Tell me about your studies today." "I learned about something called gene therapy, Grandma," Ava said softly, brushing silver hair away from her grandmother's forehead. "Scientists are finding ways to fix broken genes, to heal diseases from the inside out. Maybe someday, you'll be the one to fix mine." Lillian smiled, her eyes still bright despite the disease clouding her mind. "But more than that, baby girl, maybe someday you'll find someone who sees your beautiful heart the way I do." Ava's throat tightened. "You're all I need, Grandma." "No." Lillian's voice carried unexpected strength. "Love isn't meant to be hoarded, sweetheart. It's meant to multiply, to grow, to heal everything it touches. Promise me you won't close your heart when mine stops beating." The next morning brought news that would change everything. Dr. Emily Wong, Ava's favorite professor, called her into the office with barely contained excitement. "Ava, I've just received information about an experimental treatment trial for Huntington's disease," Dr. Wong said, sliding a folder across her desk. "It's being conducted by Carver Pharmaceuticals, and they're looking for participants. The treatment is completely free, and early results are remarkable." Ava's hands shook as she opened the folder. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just the CEO himself is apparently overseeing this particular trial personally. James Carver is known to be quite intensive in his approach." The name meant nothing to Ava, but hope bloomed in her chest like a flower breaking through concrete. "When do I apply?" The Carver Medical Research Center occupied an entire city block in downtown Chicago, its glass and steel facade gleaming like a monument to modern medicine. Ava had never felt smaller than she did walking through the marble lobby in her best dress, a simple black piece she'd owned since high school, clutching the appointment letter that might save her grandmother's life. Miss Thompson, a pristine woman in an expensive suit, approached her. "Mr. Carver will see you now." The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt eternal. Ava's reflection in the polished doors showed a young woman trying desperately to look professional, despite her second-hand clothes and nervous energy. She whispered a prayer to her parents, to God, to anyone listening. "Please let this work. Please let him help us." The executive suite was a world away from anything Ava had ever experienced. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan, while priceless art adorned walls that seemed to stretch impossibly high. But none of that registered when she saw him. James Carver stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the massive windows like a figure from a dream. Even from behind, his presence filled the room, broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist, dark hair that caught the afternoon light, an aura of controlled power that made the air itself seem to hum with energy. "Miss Thompson." His voice was deep, cultured, with an undertone of something Ava couldn't identify: pain, perhaps, or profound loneliness. "Thank you for coming." When he turned around, Ava's breath caught in her throat. James Carver was devastating in the way that broken things could be devastating. Sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw softened by lips that looked like they rarely smiled. Skin pale as winter, except for the shadows beneath eyes the color of storm clouds. He was perhaps 32, but there was something ancient in his gaze, as if he'd lived lifetimes of sorrow in those few decades. And when their eyes met, the world stopped. Ava felt it in her bones first, a recognition so profound, it was like remembering something she'd forgotten in a dream. Those storm-gray eyes widened slightly, and she watched James Carver's careful composure crack just enough to reveal something raw and vulnerable underneath. For a moment that stretched like eternity, neither of them spoke. They simply stared at each other across that expanse of expensive carpet, two souls suddenly, inexplicably aware that everything had just changed. James began, then stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. "Please sit down." But neither of them moved. Ava felt rooted to the spot, her heart hammering against her ribs as if it were trying to escape and fly to him. This was impossible. She didn't believe in love at first sight, in soulmates, in any of the romantic nonsense that filled the novels her grandmother loved. She believed in science, in fact, in things that could be measured and proven. Yet here she stood, drowning in the eyes of a stranger who felt like coming home. "You're here about the Huntington's trial," James said finally, his voice rougher now, as if speaking required effort. "My grandmother," Ava managed, surprised her voice worked at all. She's all I have left." Something flickered across his features. Understanding, sympathy, a pain that matched her own. "Tell me about her." So Ava did. She found herself speaking about grandmother Lillian with an honesty that surprised her, describing not just the medical symptoms, but the woman herself, her wisdom, her strength, her endless capacity for love, even as her own mind betrayed her. She talked about her parents, about medical school, about dreams that felt both impossible and essential. James listened with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in her life. He asked questions that showed he truly heard, not just the clinical aspects of her grandmother's condition, but the emotional weight Ava carried. When she mentioned working 3 jobs to afford treatment, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The experimental treatment," he said finally. "It's not just for your grandmother." Ava frowned. "I don't understand." James moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. "Huntington's disease is hereditary, Miss Thompson. If your grandmother has it, you have a 50% chance of developing it yourself." "I know." Ava's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I've known since I was 18. He turned back to her, and the raw emotion in his eyes nearly undid her. "I have it, too." The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. In that moment, Ava understood the shadows beneath his eyes, the careful way he held himself, the profound loneliness that seemed to emanate from his very soul. "How long have you known?" she whispered. 5 years. The symptoms started 2 years ago, subtle at first, but getting worse. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Ava could hear the fear underneath. "This treatment, it's my last hope." "Our last hope," Ava corrected. "Why are you telling me this?" Ava asked, though part of her already knew. James walked toward her slowly, stopping just close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "Because from the moment you walked into this room, I felt something I'd given up hoping for. And I think you felt it too." Ava's breath caught. She should deny it, should maintain professional boundaries, should remember that they lived in completely different worlds. Instead, she found herself nodding. "I did," she whispered. The admission hung between them, fragile and precious as spun glass. James reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her hand. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, and she saw him feel it too, in the way his eyes darkened. "Will you do the trial with me?" he asked. "Not just as participants, but as partners in this fight." Looking into his eyes, Ava saw her own desperation reflected back. The fear of losing everyone she loved, the weight of carrying a genetic time bomb, the exhaustion of fighting alone. But she also saw something else: hope, fragile but real, growing stronger with each second they maintained contact. "Yes," she breathed. And with that single word, both their lives shifted toward a future neither could yet imagine. They didn't know it yet, but they'd just taken the first step toward something extraordinary. A connection that would challenge them, change them, and ultimately save them both. In that moment, as afternoon light painted them golden against the Chicago skyline, James Carver and Ava Thompson began writing the first page of their love story. Chapter 2. The Language of Hearts. The Carver Medical Center's private treatment wing felt like stepping into another world, one where healing happened in rooms that looked more like luxury hotel suites than clinical spaces. Soft lighting replaced harsh fluorescence, comfortable recliners substituted for sterile examination tables, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Lake Michigan that seemed to stretch into infinity. Ava arrived for her first treatment session at precisely 8 a.m. Her nervous energy barely contained as she signed the final consent forms. She'd spent the previous night researching everything she could about the experimental gene therapy, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of seeing James Carver in the treatment room, looking vulnerable in a way that made her chest tight. He was seated in one of the recliners, IV already in place, his usual business attire replaced by a simple gray Henley and dark jeans that somehow made him look younger and infinitely more approachable. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile so genuine it took her breath away. "You came," he said softly. And the relief in his voice made her realize he'd been genuinely worried she might change her mind. "I promised I would," Ava replied, settling into the recliner beside his. The treatment room suddenly felt intimate, like a secret sanctuary where only they existed. Dr. Rachel Patel, the lead researcher on the project, entered with a warm smile. "Good morning, you two. Ready to make medical history?" As Dr. San, Patel began explaining the treatment protocol. Ava found herself stealing glances at James. The IV line seemed so fragile against his strong forearm, and she noticed the slight tremor in his left hand that he tried so hard to hide. When he caught her looking, instead of the embarrassment she expected, his eyes held only gratitude, as if her attention was a gift rather than an intrusion. "The treatment will take approximately 4 hours each session," Dr. Patel explained. "You'll both receive it twice weekly for the next 6 months. The gene therapy is designed to slow and potentially reverse the progression of Huntington's by targeting the specific mutation that causes the disease." "And the side effects?" Ava asked, though she'd already memorized the list. "Fatigue, mild nausea, headaches, nothing too severe. The important thing is that you both rest and stay hydrated." Dr. Patel's expression grew serious. "I should also mention that this treatment works best when patients have strong emotional support. The mind-body connection in healing is more powerful than we often acknowledge." James and Ava exchanged a glance that felt charged with meaning. They were each other's emotional support now, though neither fully understood what that meant yet. Once the IVs were flowing and Dr. Patel had left them alone, an almost nervous silence settled between them. The weight of what they were sharing, this vulnerable experience, this desperate hope, seemed to fill the room. "I've never done anything like this before," Ava admitted quietly. "What do you mean?" James asked, his voice gentle. "Trusted someone I barely know with everything." She gestured vaguely at the IV, the room, the enormity of what they were attempting. "My grandmother raised me to be careful, to keep my cards close to my chest, but somehow with you, you don't feel like you have to hide," James finished, and the understanding in his voice made her heart race. "Exactly." Ava turned to face him fully. "Is that crazy?" James was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her face as if memorizing every detail. "When I was 7, he said finally, "my father beat me so badly I couldn't walk for 3 days. My mother found me curled up in my closet, and instead of calling the police or leaving him, she just held me. She whispered that someday I'd find someone who would make all the pain make sense, someone who would see the real me and love me anyway." Ava's heart clenched. The careful control in his voice couldn't hide the years of pain beneath those words. "She died when I was 12, James continued. "Cancer. And my father, he got worse after that. By the time I was 18 and could leave, I'd built walls so high around my heart, I didn't think anyone could ever scale them." "But," Ava prompted gently. James looked directly at her, his eyes impossibly soft. "But yesterday, when you walked into my office, something inside me recognized you. Not just attracted to you, though God knows I am, but recognized you, like my soul had been waiting for yours." The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in their truth. Ava felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sensation of being truly seen. "I've been afraid my whole life," she whispered. "Afraid of losing people, afraid of being left alone, afraid that if I let someone too close, they'll discover I'm not strong enough to carry all this weight." "What pain?" James asked, his voice so gentle it undid her. And then, for the first time in her life, Ava let someone see all of her. She told him about the night her parents died, how she'd been fighting with her mother about wanting to go to a party instead of staying home to help with grandmother Lillian, how the last words she'd said to her mother were, "I hate you," before slamming her bedroom door, how she'd been asleep when the police came, and how the guilt of that fight had eaten at her for years. She told him about the nights she'd stayed awake, watching her grandmother sleep, counting each breath and praying it wouldn't be the last. About working 3 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, because failure wasn't an option when someone's life depended on her success. About the genetic test results that confirmed she carried the same mutation that was slowly stealing her grandmother's mind. She told him about the loneliness, the bone-deep, aching loneliness of being the only one left to carry her family's hopes and dreams. But how she'd convinced herself she didn't need anyone, that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Through it all, James listened with an intensity that felt like being held. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix her pain. He simply received it, as if her wounds were precious gifts she was entrusting to his care. When she finished, her cheeks were wet with tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. James reached across the space between their chairs and gently wiped them away with his thumb, his touch so tender it sent shivers through her entire body. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply. The words broke something open inside her chest, some tightly wound knot of fear and self-protection that had been there so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her natural state. "Your turn," she whispered. James took a shaky breath. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Let someone see me, the real me, not the CEO or the billionaire or the cold bastard everyone thinks I am." Ava reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. His skin was warm, slightly rough from what she suspected was rock climbing or some other outlet for his carefully controlled intensity. "Try," she said. Sohed did. James told her about the father who had terrorized his childhood, not just the physical violence, but the psychological warfare of a man who systematically destroyed his son's sense of worth, about learning to hide his emotions so completely that eventually he couldn't access them anymore, about his mother's death, and how he'd carried the crushing guilt of not being able to protect her. He told her about building his empire not from ambition but from fear, the desperate need to never be vulnerable again, to never let anyone have power over him. About relationships that had failed because he couldn't let anyone past his walls. About the diagnosis that had shattered his illusion of control and left him facing his own mortality, utterly alone. He told her about the panic attacks he'd never admitted to anyone, about nights when the loneliness felt like drowning, about how he'd convinced himself he was unlovable because love had always come with conditions or disappeared entirely. "I've spent my entire adult life afraid to need anyone," he admitted. "And now, after knowing you for less than 24 hours, I can't imagine facing this without you." The confession hung between them, vulnerable and terrifying, and absolutely true. "You don't have to," Ava said softly. "Face it without me, I mean. We're in this together now." James's hand tightened around hers. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't disappear. I know I'm complicated and damaged and probably more trouble than I'm worth, but promise me you won't give up on this and us." The word us sent warmth flooding through Ava's chest. There was an us now. Somehow, in the space of a conversation, they'd become something together that neither had been alone. "I promise," she whispered. "But you have to promise me something, too." "What?" "Promise me you'll let me see you, all of you. The good, the bad, the broken parts you think make you unlovable. Because, James," she squeezed his hand, "I already see them, and they don't scare me." James stared at her for a long moment, his gray eyes bright with unshed tears. "I promise." They spent the remaining hours of their treatment talking, Not about the big, heavy things now, but about everything else. James's secret love of classical music and how he'd learned to play piano to connect with his mother's memory. Ava's dream of opening free clinics in underserved communities and her grandmother's stories about the civil rights movement. His passion for rock climbing and how the physical challenge helped quiet his mind. Her love of cooking and how she'd learned to make something delicious from practically nothing. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms and old movies, that they both talked to themselves when they were nervous, that they both had a weakness for chocolate and a tendency to stay up too late reading. By the time their IVs were finished, something fundamental had shifted between them. They weren't just two people sharing a medical treatment anymore. They were two souls who had found their match, two hearts learning to beat in synchrony. As they prepared to leave, James hesitated at the door. Would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" he asked, and the uncertainty in his voice made him seem young and hopeful and completely irresistible. "I'd love to," Ava said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Nothing fancy," he added quickly. "Maybe just pizza and a movie at my place." The idea of seeing where he lived, of sharing something so normal and intimate as pizza and a movie, made her heart flutter. "Perfect," she said. As they walked out of the treatment center together, Ava felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope a note just for the treatment, not just for her grandmother's recovery, but for herself, for the possibility that she might not have to carry her burdens alone anymore. James felt it too. She could see it in the way he walked closer to her than necessary, in the way he kept stealing glances at her, as if making sure she was real. They were falling in love, though neither would admit it yet. But their hearts already knew what their minds were still catching up to. They had found their home in each other, and this was only the beginning. Chapter 3. Love's First Whisper. 3 weeks into their treatment, something miraculous was happening. Ava noticed it first in her grandmother. The tremors that had plagued Lillian's hands for months were lessening, and the fog that had clouded her once sharp mind was beginning to lift. During their weekly phone calls, Grandmother Lillian's voice grew stronger, clearer, more like the woman who had raised Ava with unwavering love and infinite wisdom. "My angel," Lillian had said during their last conversation. Her words crisp and purposeful, in a way they hadn't been for over a year. "There's something different about you. You sound lighter, like you're carrying joy instead of just sorrow." Ava had smiled, her heart full to bursting. "I think I am, Grandma. I think I really am." But it wasn't just Grandmother Lillian who was healing. James was transforming before Ava's eyes, and she suspected she was changing too. The subtle tremor in his left hand had disappeared entirely, and the shadows beneath his storm-gray eyes were fading day by day. More than that, though, was the way he carried himself, as if the weight he'd been bearing his entire life was finally beginning to lift. They had fallen into a routine that felt as natural as breathing. Treatment sessions twice a week where they talked for hours, sharing pieces of themselves they'd never shared with anyone. Dinners at his penthouse where they cooked together, Ava teaching James her grandmother's recipes while he introduced her to wines that cost more than her monthly rent. Long walks along Lake Michigan, where conversation flowed like music, punctuated by comfortable silences that felt more intimate than words. It was during one of these treatment sessions, on a Thursday afternoon when spring rain painted silver streaks down the medical center's windows, that everything changed. James had been quieter than usual. His gaze turned inward in a way that made Ava's chest tight with concern. They were halfway through their 4-hour session when Dr. Patel arrived with their latest test results, her face glowing with the kind of excitement that made both patients sit up straighter. "The results are extraordinary," she announced, spreading the printouts across the small table between their recliners. "James, your neural inflammation markers have decreased by 60%. The protein aggregations that typically characterize Huntington's progression have not only stopped growing, they're actually beginning to dissolve." James stared at the papers as if they might disappear if he blinked. That's not possible. "It shouldn't be, but it is. And Ava, your grandmother's results are even more remarkable. According to the scans we took yesterday, her brain tissue is actually regenerating in areas where we typically see only degeneration. We're looking at what might be the first true reversal of Huntington's disease in medical history." Ava felt tears spring to her eyes. "She's going to be okay?" "More than okay. At this rate of improvement, both of you should see complete remission within the next 6 months." After Dr. Patel left, Promising to publish their case study in the New England Journal of Medicine, James and Ava sat in stunned silence. The magnitude of what they'd just learned felt too enormous to process. They weren't just managing their condition anymore. They were beating it. "I can't believe it," Ava whispered, her voice thick with tears of joy. "She's going to really live, not just exist." James was staring at his hand steady, strong hands that no longer betrayed the disease trying to claim his future. "For the first time in 5 years, I can imagine tomorrow without terror." "What will you do?" Ava asked softly. "With all those tomorrows you thought you'd lost?" James turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her heart stop. It was wonder, pure and simple. The look of a man who had been living in darkness and suddenly discovered light. "I used to think about all the things I'd never get to do," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Never get married, never have children, never grow old with someone I loved. I'd made peace with dying alone, Ava. I'd accepted that my legacy would be money and businesses, and nothing that really mattered." "And now?" she prompted, though she could barely breathe, waiting for his answer. "Now I think about building a life with you." The words hung between them like a bridge neither had dared to cross before. Ava felt her heart slam against her ribs as James continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other for 3 weeks, but Ava, you haven't just been part of my healing. You've been the reason for it. Every treatment session, every conversation, every moment we've shared, you've made me want to fight for a future I'd given up on." Ava couldn't speak. The intensity in his eyes was overwhelming, like staring directly into the sun. "I'm falling in love with you," James said simply. "No, that's not right. I've already fallen. I fell the moment you walked into my office and looked at me like I was worth saving." The confession broke something open inside Ava's chest, some dam she'd built around her heart that suddenly couldn't hold back the flood of feeling rushing through her. "James," she whispered. But before she could say more, something shifted in his expression. His face crumpled, and suddenly he was sobbing deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very core of his being. Years of suppressed emotion, of grief and fear and desperate loneliness, poured out of him in waves that shook his entire body. Without thinking, Ava unbuckled herself from her recliner and moved to his, curling up beside him in the oversized chair. She wrapped her arms around him and held him as he fell apart, one hand stroking his dark hair while the other pressed against his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. "I'm sorry," he gasped between sobs. "I'm so sorry." "I don't know why, shh," Ava murmured, pressing her lips to his temple. "Don't apologize. Don't ever apologize for feeling. I've been so scared," he whispered against her shoulder. "So scared for so long. And now I can breathe again. And it's because of you." Ava held him tighter, her own tears falling into his hair. "You saved me, too," she whispered. "You saved us both." James pulled back just enough to look at her, his gray eyes red-rimmed but clearer than she'd ever seen them. With infinite gentleness, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion but steady with certainty. "I love your brilliant mind and your generous heart. I love the way you make me feel like I'm worth something more than my bank account. I love that you see the man I want to be instead of the broken mess I've always been." Ava's breath caught. She could see her entire future reflected in his eyes, a future full of love and laughter and the kind of deep, abiding partnership she'd only dreamed about. "I love you too," she whispered, and watched his face transform with wonder. The kiss that followed was inevitable, natural as breathing or the rhythm of their hearts. James's lips were soft against hers, gentle at first, almost reverent. It was a kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities, of two souls finally finding their sanctuary in each other. When they deepened the kiss, Ava felt the world tilt on its axis. Every nerve ending in her body came alive as their tongues met tentatively, then with growing confidence. James tasted like hope and healing, like everything she'd been searching for without knowing she was lost. "I love you," he murmured against her lips, the words a prayer and a vow all at once. "I love you," she replied, and felt her heart shatter and rebuild itself around those 3 perfect words. They stayed curled together in that treatment chair long after their IVs were finished, trading soft kisses and whispered confessions. The medical equipment that had brought them together faded into background noise as they discovered the miraculous chemistry of two people falling completely, irrevocably in love. "What happens now?" Ava asked eventually, her head resting against James's chest, where she could hear the steady rhythm of his healing heart. "Now we build something beautiful together," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We take these second chances we've been given, and we create a love story that heals everyone it touches." Ava smiled, feeling more complete than she ever had in her life. "I like the sound of that. There's something else," James said, his voice taking on a note of nervous excitement. "Something I want to share with you." "What?" "My mother left me something before she died: letters, journals, paintings she'd hidden from my father. I've never shown them to anyone, but I want to show them to you. I want you to know where the good parts of me came from." Ava lifted her head to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression and loving him even more for it. "I'd be honored. Tomorrow night at my place." "It's a date," she said, sealing the promise with another kiss. As they finally disentangled themselves and prepared to leave the treatment center, both of them felt the shift that had occurred. They weren't just two people sharing a medical treatment anymore. They weren't even just two people falling in love. They were partners now, in healing and in hope. They were building something together that was bigger than either of them alone. A love that would prove strong enough to overcome anything the world might throw at them. Walking out into the spring afternoon, fingers interlaced and hearts full of impossible joy, James Carver and Ava Thompson stepped into the next chapter of their love story. They had whispered their first "I love yous," shared their first real kiss, and made their first promises to each other. The future stretched ahead of them like an unwritten song, full of harmonies they would create together, and for the first time in their lives, both of them believed with absolute certainty that their love was strong enough to make any dream come true. The treatment was healing their bodies, but their love was healing their souls. And this was only the beginning of the miracles they would create together. Chapter 4. Souls Entwined. The elevator to James's penthouse seemed to take forever, each floor adding to the anticipation that hummed between them like electricity. Ava's hand was warm in his, her fingers intertwined with his own in a way that felt both new and ancient, as if they'd been holding hands across lifetimes. "Are you nervous?" James asked softly, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Ava looked up at him, her dark eyes luminous in the elevator's soft lighting. "About seeing your mother's things? No. About how much I love you already? Terrified." The honesty in her voice made his heart stutter. 3 days had passed since their first kiss, since they'd whispered those life-altering words to each other. And the depth of feeling between them continued to grow in ways that defied logic or reason. "Good terrified or bad terrified?" he asked, bringing her hand to his lips to press a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "The kind that makes me want to run toward you instead of away," she replied, and he understood exactly what she meant. The penthouse doors slid open to reveal not the sterile luxury Ava had expected, but a home that felt warm and lived in. Soft lighting cast golden shadows across comfortable furniture, and everywhere she looked, she saw touches that revealed James's true nature. Books stacked on every surface, a guitar resting against the window, plants thriving in carefully tended abundance. "It's beautiful," she breathed, but James was already leading her toward a set of French doors she hadn't noticed. "Wait until you see this," he said, his voice carrying a note of nervous excitement that made her heart flutter. The doors opened onto a rooftop garden that took Ava's breath away. It wasn't manicured perfection. It was wild and abundant, full of flowering vines and herb gardens, with a small fountain bubbling peacefully in one corner. String lights twinkled overhead like captured stars, and the scent of jasmine and roses filled the evening air. "James," she whispered, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "This is magical." "I built it for her," he said quietly, leading her to a wooden bench positioned beside the fountain. "After she died, I needed somewhere to talk to her, somewhere that felt alive." Ava's heart ached at the love in his voice. "Do you still talk to her? Every day?" James sat down beside her, his eyes fixed on a climbing rosebush, heavy with white blooms. "I tell her about the business, about the treatment, about—" He turned to look at Ava, his expression soft. "About you? What do you tell her about me?" James smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. I tell her I finally understand what she meant when she said love was supposed to heal, not hurt. I tell her you make me want to be the man she always believed I could be. Ava felt tears prick her eyes. I wish I could have met her. She would have loved you, James said with absolute certainty. She always said the right woman for me would be someone who could see my heart, despite all the armor I'd built around it. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by the garden's gentle sounds and the distant hum of the city below. Then James stood, extending his hand to her. There's more I want to show you. He led her back inside, but instead of stopping in the main living area, he continued down a hallway she hadn't seen before. At the end was a door he unlocked, with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. I've never shown this to anyone, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The room beyond was James's most private sanctuary, a combination studio and shrine to his mother's memory. Canvases lined the walls, some finished, others mere sketches, all revealing a talent Ava had never suspected. They were powerful, emotional pieces that seemed to capture feelings rather than mere images, stormy seascapes that spoke of loneliness, forest scenes that whispered of hope, abstract pieces that pulsed with barely contained anguish. But it was the easel in the center of the room that made Ava's breath catch. On it was a painting she recognized immediately herself, captured in a moment of laughter during one of their treatment sessions. But it wasn't just her physical appearance he'd painted. Somehow, he'd managed to capture her essence, the joy and strength and love that radiated from her eyes. When did you? She began but couldn't finish the question. I started it the day after we met, James admitted, his cheeks flushing slightly. I couldn't get you out of my head the way you looked when you talked about your grandmother, the way you listened when I told you about my father. I had to capture it somehow. Ava approached the painting slowly, studying every brushstroke. She could see the love in every detail, the reverence with which he'd painted her face. It's how you see me, she said softly. It's how you are, James corrected, moving to stand behind her. Beautiful and strong and so full of light, it takes my breath away. She turned in his arms, looking up into his storm-gray eyes. Show me her things, your mother's. James led her to an antique trunk positioned beneath the window. Inside were treasures that spoke of a woman who had loved deeply despite her circumstances. Journals filled with poetry and pressed flowers, sketches of a young James playing in the garden, letters to the son. She knew she might leave too soon. She wrote this the night before she died, James said, his voice thick with emotion as he handed Ava a folded piece of paper. Ava unfolded it carefully, her heart breaking at the elegant handwriting. My dearest James, if you're reading this, then I've gone ahead to wait for you in whatever comes next. I need you to know that every moment of pain I endured was worth it, because it gave me you. You are the best thing I ever created, the most beautiful gift I could have given the world. I worry that your father's darkness will make you forget the light inside you. But I have faith that someday you'll find someone who will remind you. Love is supposed to heal, my darling boy. It's supposed to make you more yourself, not less. When you find that person you will find them, don't let fear keep you from the happiness you deserve. Be brave enough to love completely. Be brave enough to be loved completely in return. All my love, always and forever, Mom. Ava's tears fell onto the paper as she finished reading. She knew, she whispered. She knew you'd find me. Or that you'd find me, James said gently, taking the letter and refolding it with reverent care. Either way, she was right. You did remind me about the light. Ava cupped his face in her hands, studying the features she'd come to love so completely. She was right about something else, too. What? About being brave enough to love completely. Ava's voice dropped to a whisper. I want to be brave with you, James, in every way. James searched her eyes, finding there the same desire that was coursing through his own veins. Ava, he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. I love you, she said simply. Not just your heart or your mind, but all of you. I want all of you. The air between them shifted, charged with a new kind of electricity. James's eyes darkened as he studied her face, seeing the absolute certainty there. The kiss that followed was different from the gentle ones they'd shared before. This was fire and need, the kind of desperate hunger that comes from finding your perfect match. James's hands tangled in her hair, while hers clutched at his shoulders. both of them drowning in sensation. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her lips, his forehead resting against hers. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she replied, and he could hear the truth of it in every word. He led her to his bedroom, a space that somehow managed to be both elegant and intimate, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the glittering city. But Ava only had eyes for James as he turned to face her, his expression vulnerable and full of wonder. "I've never," he began, then stopped, his cheeks flushing. "Neither have I," Ava admitted softly. "Not like this, not when it means everything." They undressed each other slowly, reverently, as if unwrapping the most precious of gifts. Every revealed inch of skin was worshipped with gentle touches and soft kisses, their bodies learning the landscape of love they would explore together for the rest of their lives. When James finally made love to Ava, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to both their eyes. This wasn't just physical connection, it was the joining of two souls who had been searching for each other across time and space. Every touch, every whispered word of devotion, every shared breath bound them closer together, until there was no distinction between where one ended and the other began. Afterward, they lay entwined in the soft lamplight, their bodies still humming with the afterglow of perfect connection. Ava's head rested on James's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his healing heart, while his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I used to think I was broken," James said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "That the things my father did to me had damaged me beyond repair." Ava lifted her head to look at him, her eyes soft with love. "And now? Now I think maybe I was just incomplete, waiting for you to make me whole." Ava stretched up to kiss him, pouring all of her love into the gentle contact. "We make each other whole. Is that what this is?" James asked, wonder in his voice. "This feeling like I could conquer the world or be perfectly content, never leaving this bed?" Ava laughed softly, the sound like music in the quiet room. "I think that's love, James. Real. Deep. Change your entire life, love." "Then I'm the luckiest man alive," he said, rolling them over so he could look down into her beautiful face. "Because I get to love you for the rest of my life." "The rest of our lives," Ava corrected, and sealed the promise with another kiss. They made love again as the city sparkled beyond their windows, this time with the confidence of lovers who knew they belonged together. Their bodies moved in perfect harmony, two hearts beating as one, two souls finally completely entwined. As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, both of them knew that something sacred had happened between them. They had given each other not just their bodies but their hearts, their fears, their dreams, their very souls. They were no longer two separate people learning to love each other. They were one love wearing two faces, one future built on the foundation of absolute trust and devotion, and this was only the beginning of the miracles their love would create. Chapter 5. The Miracle of Life. The morning sickness hit Ava like a tidal wave during their 7th week of treatment. She barely made it to the medical center's restroom before her stomach emptied itself completely, leaving her trembling and pale as she gripped the cool porcelain sink. "Ava." James's voice was tight with concern as he knocked gently on the door. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" She emerged from the restroom on shaky legs, her dark skin ashen in a way that made James's heart clench with worry. They'd been inseparable for the past month, their love deepening with each passing day. But this was the first time she'd shown any sign of illness since their treatment began. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then immediately swayed on her feet. James caught her before she could fall, his strong arms encircling her waist as he guided her to the nearest chair. "You are absolutely not fine. We're calling Dr. Patel." "It's probably just something I ate," Ava protested weakly. But even as she said it, a terrible possibility was beginning to form in the back of her mind. The nausea, the exhaustion she'd been attributing to their intense treatment schedule, the fact that her period was now 3 weeks late. "Ava," James knelt in front of her chair, his gray eyes searching her face. "What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." I think she began, then stopped, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "James, when was my last period?" The question hung between them like a bridge they were both afraid to cross. James's eyes widened as understanding dawned on his face, followed immediately by something that looked remarkably like wonder. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" he whispered. Before Ava could answer, Dr. Patel appeared in the hallway, having been summoned by one of the nurses who'd witnessed Ava's dash to the restroom. "What's going on?" she asked, her professional demeanor immediately shifting to concern as she took in Ava's pale complexion and James's stunned expression. "I think I might be pregnant," Ava said quietly, the words feeling surreal as they left her lips. "Doctor." Patel's eyebrows shot up. Oh my. Well, let's not jump to conclusions. Let me run some quick tests." 20 minutes later, they sat in Dr. Patel's office, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white as they waited for the results. The blood test would be definitive, but the pregnancy test Ava had taken was already showing two unmistakable pink lines. "Well, Doc," Patel said as she entered with a chart and an expression of barely contained excitement, "I have some extraordinary news. Ava, you are indeed pregnant, about 7 weeks along by my calculations." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Ava felt James's hand tighten around hers as they both processed what they'd just heard. "But that's not the most remarkable part, Doctor," Patel continued, her voice growing more animated. "I ran the test twice to be certain. Ava, you're carrying twins." The silence that followed was profound. Ava stared at Dr. Winnetime. Patel as if she'd spoken in a foreign language, while James looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "Twins," Ava whispered. "2 healthy heartbeats, both strong and regular. I'd like to do an ultrasound to confirm, but the blood work is conclusive." Ava looked at James, expecting to see fear or panic in his expression. Instead, she found pure, radiant joy spreading across his face like sunrise. "Twins," he breathed. And then he was laughing deep, joyous laughter that filled the office and made Ava's heart soar. "Ava, we're having twins. I know we haven't discussed this scenario, Doctor," Patel said gently, "but I should mention that the gene therapy doesn't appear to have any negative effects on pregnancy. If anything, your overall health improvements should make for a very healthy pregnancy." "We're having babies," Ava said, the reality finally sinking in. "James, we're having babies." James pulled her into his arms right there in the doctor's office, holding her as if she were made of spun gold. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I love you, and I love them already." The ultrasound that followed was a revelation. Seeing those 2 tiny flickering heartbeats on the monitor, watching James's face transform with wonder as he stared at the screen, Ava felt her entire world realign itself around this new reality. "There they are, Doctor," Patel said softly, pointing to the screen. "Baby A and baby B, both measuring perfectly for 7 weeks. James reached out tentatively, his finger almost touching the monitor where their children's images glowed in black and white. "They're really there," he said in amazement. "They're really there," Ava confirmed, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched the man she loved fall in love with their unborn children. That evening, they sat in James's rooftop garden, Ava curled against his side, as they watched the sunset paint the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and rose. James's hand rested protectively over her stomach, his thumb tracing gentle circles over the place where their babies were growing. "I can't believe we made them," he said softly, wonder coloring every word. "2 little people who are half you and half me." "Are you scared?" Ava asked, though she already knew the answer from the peace she felt radiating from him. "Terrified," James admitted with a laugh, "and more excited than I've ever been in my life." "Is that normal?" "I think so. I keep thinking about all the things I want to teach them, all the ways I want to love them." Ava tilted her head to look up at him. "What about you? What do you want for them?" James was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he considered the question. "I want them to know they're loved unconditionally," he said finally. "Not when they're successful or well-behaved or impressive, just completely the way my mother loved me, the way you love me." "They will," Ava said with absolute certainty. "God, James. They're going to be so loved. I want to break the cycle," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "My father's violence, his cruelty that ends with me, these babies will never know what it's like to be afraid of their father's hands." Ava's heart broke and mended simultaneously at the fierce protectiveness in his voice. "They'll know only gentle hands and kind words. They'll know what love is supposed to look like." "Tell me about your dreams for them," James said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Ava smiled, her hand joining his over her stomach. "I want them to be curious about the world, to ask questions, and seek answers. I want them to know they can be anything they dream of being. I want them to have your strength, and your intelligence, and your compassion, and your fierce heart, James added. I want them to change the world the way you've changed mine. They talked long into the night about cribs and nurseries, about names and futures, about the life they would build together for their growing family. James shared his vision of converting one of his spare bedrooms into a nursery that would be worthy of their children, not ostentatious or cold, but warm and welcoming and full of love. I want to paint murals on the walls, he said, his artistic side emerging as he described his plans. Maybe scenes from fairy tales or a garden like this one where they can imagine adventures. I want to read to them every night, Ava said dreamily. My grandmother used to read to me these beautiful stories about brave princesses and noble knights. I want to give them that magic. We'll give them everything, James promised, his voice thick with emotion. Everything we never had, and everything we wished for. Over the following weeks, their joy only grew. James threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else, reading every pregnancy and parenting book he could find. He researched the best obstetricians in the city, interviewed pediatricians, and began designing the nursery with meticulous care. But it was the quiet moments that revealed the depth of his transformation. Ava would find him talking to her belly in the mornings before she woke up, his voice soft and wondering as he told their babies about the world they would be born into. "Good morning, little ones," she heard him whisper one morning, his hand warm against her skin. "It's going to be a beautiful day today. Your mama has a treatment session, and afterward we're going to look at paint colors for your room. I'm thinking soft greens and yellows, peaceful colors that will help you dream, sweet dreams." Ava kept her eyes closed, not wanting to interrupt the tender moment, as James continued his morning conversation with their children. "I want you to know that you're already so loved," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mama is the most incredible woman in the world, and she's growing you with such care and love. And your daddy? Well, your daddy never thought he'd get to have this, never thought he'd get to love you, and protect you, and watch you grow up. They can hear you, you know," Ava said softly, finally opening her eyes to find James looking at her with such tenderness, it took her breath away. "Good," he said, leaning down to kiss her belly. "I want them to know my voice, to know they're safe and wanted." "They're lucky," Ava murmured, running her fingers through his dark hair, "to have you as their father." "We're all lucky," James corrected, moving up to capture her lips in a gentle kiss. "Lucky to have found each other. Lucky to have this chance at happiness." As her pregnancy progressed, and her belly began to show the first signs of their growing babies, James became even more attentive and protective. He would spend hours with his hands on her stomach, marveling at every flutter and kick, talking to the twins as if they were already born. "I think baby A is going to be a soccer player," he said one evening as a particularly strong kick caught him in the palm. "Did you feel that?" "Trust me, I felt it," Ava laughed, shifting to find a more comfortable position against his chest. "What about baby B? More of a thinker, I think. Quieter, but just as strong." James smiled as another gentle movement rippled across Ava's skin. "They're going to be perfect, aren't they?" "They already are," Ava said, covering his hands with hers, "just like their daddy." The love between them had deepened into something sacred with the knowledge that they had created life together. Every shared moment felt precious, every touch a prayer of gratitude for the miracle growing between them. They were no longer just James and Ava. They were a family, bound together by love and hope, and the two tiny hearts beating in perfect rhythm with their own. The future stretched ahead of them like a promise, full of laughter and sleepless nights, and all the beautiful chaos that comes with loving completely, and they couldn't wait to begin. Chapter 6. Storms of the Heart. The first crack in their perfect world appeared on a Tuesday morning in the form of a gossip column that James's assistant, Clara, reluctantly placed on his desk alongside his morning coffee. "Sir," she said carefully, her usual professional composure tinged with concern, "you need to see this." James glanced at the headline and felt his blood turn to ice. Pharmaceutical Prince's Pregnant Gold Digger. An inside look at James Carver's latest acquisition. The article was vicious, painting Ava as a calculating opportunist who had deliberately seduced the wealthy CEO for his money. It questioned the legitimacy of her medical studies, suggested she had deliberately gotten pregnant to trap him, and included quotes from anonymous sources claiming she had bragged about landing the biggest fish in Chicago. Every word was a lie, but they were lies crafted with surgical precision to inflict maximum damage. "Who wrote this?" James demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. "Sophia Langley," Clara replied reluctantly. "She has connections at the Tribune. I've already reached out to our legal team, but the damage is already done," James finished, his hands clenching into fists as he reread the article. Sophia, his ex-fiancée, who had left him when his diagnosis became public, claiming she couldn't be tied to damaged goods. The woman who had tried to manipulate him into marriage for his fortune, only to abandon him when she realized his illness might affect their social standing. James's phone buzzed with a text from Ava. "Running late for treatment. Something's wrong with Grandma Lillian. Meet you there in an hour." His heart clenched. If Sophia was targeting Ava, she wouldn't stop at one article. She had the resources and the connections to make their lives hell, and she was vindictive enough to enjoy every moment of it. James was right to be worried. By the time Ava arrived at the medical center, her face was streaked with tears, and her hands were shaking. She'd been ambushed by reporters outside her apartment building, bombarded with questions about her relationship with James and her pregnancy. "Did you see it?" she asked without preamble, collapsing into the chair beside him in their treatment room. "I saw it," James said grimly, reaching for her hands. "Ava, you know none of it is true." "Of course I know that," she snapped, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry. I'm just God, James. They were waiting for me outside my building, outside the grocery store, at the hospital where my grandmother is staying. They followed me everywhere, shouting questions about whether I trapped you, whether the babies are even yours." James felt murderous rage building in his chest. "They what?" "One of them asked if I was planning to abort the babies if you didn't marry me," Ava continued, her voice breaking. "They asked if you were paying for my medical school, if I was a prostitute before I met you. They called me." She stopped, unable to repeat the racial slurs that had been hurled at her. "I'm going to destroy her," James said quietly, his voice carrying a deadly calm that made Ava shiver. "I'm going to make Sophia Langley regret the day she was born." "You can't," Ava said, squeezing his hands. "That's exactly what she wants for you to lose control. To do something that makes you look like the villain." James knew she was right, but the protective fury coursing through him was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The thought of anyone hurting Ava, of anyone threatening their babies, made him want to burn the entire world down. "We need to be smart about this," Ava continued. Though her voice was shaky, "We need to." She was interrupted by James's phone ringing. The caller ID showed his head of security. "Mr. Carver." The voice on the other end was tense. "We've had a security breach at the penthouse. Someone leaked photos of the nursery you've been preparing, and they're being circulated online with some very ugly commentary." James closed his eyes, feeling the walls of their sanctuary crumbling around them. "How bad? Bad enough that I'd recommend Miss Thompson not return to the penthouse tonight. The crowd outside is getting ugly." After ending the call, James turned to Ava, who had gone pale. "Pack a bag," he said gently. "We're going to my house in Lake Forest until this blows over." "I'm not running away," Ava said, lifting her chin with the stubborn strength he loved so much. "I won't let her chase me out of my own life. This isn't running away. It's being smart. I can protect you better there, away from the city and the media circus." "Protect me?" Ava's voice rose slightly. "James, I'm not some fragile doll who needs to be hidden away. I can handle this." "Not like this. You can't," James argued, gesturing toward the window where they could see news vans gathering in the parking lot below. "Not when they're willing to follow you everywhere to harass you while you're pregnant. So, what's your solution? Lock me away in your country house like some shameful secret?" The words hit James like a physical blow. "Is that what you think this is? That I'm ashamed of you?" "I don't know what to think anymore," Ava said, tears beginning to fall again. "All I know is that the moment things get difficult, your first instinct is to hide me away where no one can see us together." "My first instinct is to protect you," James said, his voice rising with frustration. "You and our babies. If that means keeping you away from vultures who want to destroy everything we've built together, then yes." That's exactly what I'm going to do. Without asking me, without considering what I want or need, James ran his hands through his hair, fear and desperation making his voice sharper than he intended. What you want isn't the priority right now, Ava. Keeping you safe is the only thing that matters. The moment the words left his mouth, he knew he'd made a terrible mistake. Ava's face went very still, and when she spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. What I want isn't the priority. That's not what I meant. No, I think that's exactly what you meant, Ava said, standing up abruptly. The moment your ex-fiancé starts causing trouble, I become a problem to be managed instead of a partner to be consulted. That's not fair, James protested, standing as well. You know that's not how I see you. Do I? Because right now, it feels like you see me as another acquisition that needs to be protected, not as the woman you claim to love. I do love you, James said desperately, more than my own life. That's why I need to keep you safe. Safe from what? From living my own life? From making my own choices? Ava's voice was rising now, months of stress and hormones and fear finally boiling over. I'm not some princess in a tower, James. I'm a grown woman who's been taking care of herself long before you came along. And look how well that's worked out, James snapped, immediately regretting the words as they left his mouth. Ava recoiled as if he'd slapped her. What is that supposed to mean? Nothing. I know. Say it. Say what you really think about my life, about the choices I've made. James knew he was digging himself deeper, but the fear and anger and desperation were clouding his judgment. I think you're so used to struggling that you don't know how to let someone take care of you. I think you're so afraid of being dependent on anyone that you'd rather fight a war you can't win than accept help. Help? Ava laughed bitterly. Is that what you call making decisions about my life without consulting me? Is that what you call treating me like I'm incapable of handling my own problems? Your problems became our problems. The moment you became pregnant with my children, James shot back and immediately knew he'd crossed a devastating line. Ava went very still, her dark eyes flashing with hurt and anger. Your children? So now they're just yours. That's not what I meant. No, I think it is exactly what you meant. I think when push comes to shove, you see me as the vessel carrying your heirs, not as an equal partner in this relationship. That's not true, James said desperately, reaching for her. But she stepped back. Isn't it, the moment things get difficult, you want to hide me away like I'm something to be ashamed of? You want to make decisions for me like I'm a child. You want to control every aspect of my life because you think you know what's best for me. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From the world. From reality. From having to actually stand up and fight for us instead of just throwing money at the problem. The accusation hit James like a physical blow. That's not fair. Fair? Ava's voice cracked. What's not fair is realizing that the man I love, the man I'm carrying children for, sees me as something to be managed instead of someone to be partnered with. You're twisting everything I've said. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you want a relationship where you make all the decisions. And I just smile and look grateful. That's not what I want, James said, his own voice breaking now. I want you to be safe. I want our babies to be safe. I want us to have a future together. Then fight for it, Ava said fiercely. Don't hide from it. Don't try to control it. Fight for it. I am fighting for it. No, you're running from it. You're so afraid of losing control that you're willing to lose me instead. The words hung between them like a chasm that neither knew how to cross. James stared at Ava, seeing the hurt and disappointment in her eyes, and felt something fundamental shift between them. So, what are you saying? He asked quietly. I'm saying that maybe I need time to think about whether the man I fell in love with is the same man who just told me my wants don't matter. Ava, please. I'm going to stay with my grandmother for a few days, she said, gathering her purse with shaking hands. I need to make sure she's okay. And I need some space to figure out if we want the same things from this relationship. Don't do this, James pleaded. Don't let Sophia win by tearing us apart. This isn't about Sophia, Ava said sadly. This is about whether you trust me enough to be your partner, not just your pregnant girlfriend. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. I love you, James, more than I've ever loved anyone. But I won't be with someone who thinks loving me means controlling me. After she left, James stood alone in their treatment room, surrounded by the medical equipment that had brought them together, and felt his world crumble around him. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing, as he realized he might have just lost the most important thing in his life. Outside, the media circus continued, but James barely noticed. All he could think about was the look in Ava's eyes when she'd walked away, not anger, but something far worse, disappointment. And for the first time since his diagnosis, James wondered if there were some things that love alone couldn't heal. Chapter 7. The Darkest Hour. 3 weeks passed in a hell of silence and separation that felt like 3 years. Ava had moved back to her tiny apartment near the hospital where her grandmother was recovering, the space feeling impossibly small after the expansive comfort of James's penthouse. Every morning, she pressed her hand to her growing belly, now prominently showing at 16 weeks, and whispered apologies to their babies for the chaos their parents had created. The media attention had died down somewhat, but Sophia's poison had spread through Chicago's social circles like wildfire. Ava couldn't walk down the street without feeling the weight of stares and whispered conversations. The prestigious medical school she attended had become a minefield of pitying looks and barely concealed gossip. "She's the one," she heard a classmate whisper as she passed in the hallway. "The gold digger who trapped James Carver with twins." Ava kept her head high and her expression neutral, but each comment was a fresh wound on her already bleeding heart. What hurt most wasn't the lies about her character. It was the growing doubt that maybe James believed them too. Maybe he'd realized she wasn't worth the trouble she'd brought into his perfectly ordered life. Her phone buzzed constantly with missed calls from James, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Every time she saw his name on the screen, she remembered the look in his eyes when he'd told her that what she wanted wasn't the priority. She remembered how quickly he'd moved to control the situation instead of trusting her to handle it alongside him. The only person who knew the full extent of her heartbreak was her grandmother, who had made a remarkable recovery thanks to the gene therapy, but was now confined to the hospital again due to complications from stress-induced hypertension. "Baby girl," Grandmother Lillian said weakly from her hospital bed, "you can't keep punishing that boy for being afraid." "He wasn't afraid, Grandma," Ava replied, adjusting the pillows behind her grandmother's back. "He was controlling. There's a difference." "Is there?" "When you love someone as much as you two love each other, sometimes fear and control look an awful lot alike." Ava's throat tightened. "He doesn't love me the way I thought he did. If he did, he would have stood by me instead of trying to hide me away. Or maybe he loves you so much that the thought of losing you made him stupid," Lillian said gently. "Men do that sometimes. Love so hard they forget how to love smart." "I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me to make my own decisions," Ava said, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly where the twins had been increasingly active. "Our babies deserve parents who respect each other. They deserve parents who love each other. And you do love him, don't you?" Ava's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. "So much it's killing me." "Then why are you here instead of there, fighting for what you want?" Before Ava could answer, her phone rang. Not James this time, but Dr. Patel from the medical center. "Ava, I need you to come in immediately, Doctor." Patel's voice was tight with concern. "Your latest blood work shows some concerning changes. We need to discuss your pregnancy management going forward." The drive to the medical center felt endless, Ava's heart pounding with fear for her babies. When she arrived, Dr. Patel's expression confirmed her worst fears. "Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and you're showing early signs of preeclampsia, Dr. Patel explained gently. "Combined with the stress you've been under, we need to consider this a high-risk pregnancy from this point forward." "What does that mean for the babies?" Ava asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means we need to monitor you very closely. Any additional stress could trigger complications that might require early delivery. Ava, I have to ask, is there anything in your personal life that might be contributing to your stress levels?" Ava's laugh was bitter. "You could say that. The father, James, he's been calling the office daily, asking about you and the babies. He's desperate for information about your health." "He is?" Ava's heart clenched. "He loves you, Doctor," Patel said simply. "Whatever happened between you two, that man is eaten alive with worry about you and those babies." James, meanwhile, was slowly destroying himself with grief and self-recrimination. His penthouse had become a mausoleum of memories. The nursery he'd been so lovingly preparing stood half-finished, baby clothes and cribs serving as monuments to a future that seemed increasingly impossible. He couldn't bear to complete it without Ava, but he couldn't bring himself to dismantle it either. Sleep was impossible. Food was an afterthought. His work suffered so dramatically that his board of directors called an emergency meeting to discuss his fitness to lead the company. James, his longtime mentor and board member Henry Sullivan, said carefully, "We're concerned about your recent instability, the media attention, your obvious distraction. It's affecting the company's stock price." "I'm handling it," James said flatly, though they all knew he was lying. "Are you? Because from where we sit, it looks like you're falling apart. The Carver name has always stood for stability and excellence. Right now, you're providing neither." The criticism stung because it was true. James had built his entire identity around control and competence, and now he was failing at both. But he couldn't bring himself to care about board meetings and stock prices when the woman he loved was carrying his children and wouldn't even speak to him. Sophia, meanwhile, was far from finished with her campaign of destruction. She'd been carefully orchestrating a more insidious form of manipulation, using her social connections to plant seeds of doubt about James's true feelings for Ava. She arranged for mutual acquaintances to run into Ava at coffee shops and medical appointments, casually dropping mentions of how they'd heard James was relieved to have some space from the relationship. She leaked fake text messages to gossip bloggers, suggesting James had confided to friends that he wasn't certain the babies were his, that he'd been trapped by a woman who was clearly after his fortune. Each carefully placed lie was designed to reinforce Ava's worst fears about their relationship, and they worked with devastating effectiveness. The final blow came when Sophia orchestrated her masterpiece of manipulation. She hired a photographer to take pictures of James entering and leaving an upscale jewelry store, then made sure the photos reached Ava with the implication that he was shopping for engagement rings but for someone else. The truth was that James had been looking at baby jewelry, tiny bracelets and necklaces he wanted to give their children someday. But Ava, already wounded and vulnerable, saw only what Sophia wanted her to see, evidence that James was moving on without her. That night, alone in her small apartment with her hand on her growing belly, Ava made a decision that broke her heart but felt necessary for her survival. She would focus on her babies and her studies, and she would stop hoping for a reconciliation that clearly wasn't coming. James, meanwhile, was reaching his own breaking point. The silence from Ava was slowly killing him, but his pride and his fear of rejection kept him from showing up at her door and demanding to be heard. It was Clara, his long-suffering assistant, who finally forced him to confront the depth of his self-destruction. "Sir," she said, entering his office with the morning reports, "you have dark circles under your eyes that are visible from space. You haven't eaten a proper meal in weeks, and yesterday you called me Ava 3 times during our staff meeting." James looked up from the paperwork he'd been staring at without reading. "Your point?" "My point is that you're dying without her, and she's probably dying without you. And this whole situation is the stupidest thing I've ever witnessed in 20 years of working for stubborn, prideful men. She won't take my calls. Have you tried showing up?" She made it clear. She needed space. That was 3 weeks ago. People change their minds, especially when they're pregnant and hormonal, and probably just as miserable as you are. James slumped back in his chair. "What if she doesn't want to see me? What if she's decided she's better off without me?" Clara's expression softened. "Then at least you'll know. But right now, you're both suffering based on assumptions and wounded pride. Those babies deserve parents who are brave enough to fight for each other." That evening, James sat in his empty penthouse, staring at the ultrasound photos that were the only pictures he had of his children. Somewhere across the city, Ava was probably getting ready for bed, their babies moving beneath her heart while she faced the future alone. For the first time since their fight, James allowed himself to acknowledge the truth he'd been running from. He hadn't tried to control Ava because he didn't trust her. He'd tried to control the situation because he was terrified of losing her, and in his fear, he'd driven away the only person who had ever made his life worth living. He picked up his phone, scrolled to her number, and this time, instead of calling, he began to type, "Ava, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that not a day passes that I don't regret every word I said. I love you. I love our babies. I'm sorry I was too frightened and too proud to trust you to be my partner instead of trying to be your protector. If you can ever forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you are and always will be my priority. If you can't, I understand. But please know that you and our children are the most important things in my world. He stared at the message for an hour, his finger hovering over the send button. Finally, with a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, he pressed send and waited to see if love really could conquer pride. But as his phone sat silent through the night, James began to wonder if some mistakes were too big to forgive and some love too damaged to heal. Chapter 8. Love's Redemption. James's text message went unanswered for 48 agonizing hours. Each minute that passed without a response felt like a small death, confirmation that he had destroyed the most precious thing in his life through his own pride and fear. On the third day, when the silence had become unbearable, James found himself in his mother's sanctuary, the room where her letters and journals waited like dormant wisdom, ready to guide him when he was finally desperate enough to listen. He pulled out the trunk with shaking hands, searching through her belongings until he found what he was looking for. A letter she'd written to him when he was 5 years old, after his father had locked him in the basement for hours as punishment for spilling juice on an expensive rug. My dearest James. The letter began in his mother's elegant handwriting. I saw what your father did to you today, and my heart is breaking. I want you to know that his cruelty is not your fault, and it is not what love looks like. Love is patient and kind. Love protects without controlling. Love trusts without demanding. Your father rules through fear because he is afraid of losing control, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of admitting he might be wrong. James's hands trembled as he continued reading. Promise me something, my beautiful boy. Promise me that when you grow up and find someone to love, you won't repeat his mistakes. Don't let fear make you cruel. Don't let pride make you controlling. Don't let your wounded heart wound others. The cycle of pain ends with you, if you're brave enough to choose love over fear. The words hit James like a revelation. He was doing exactly what his father had done, trying to control the situation through dominance instead of trust, making decisions for Ava instead of with her, letting his fear of loss destroy the very thing he was afraid of losing. Oh God, he whispered, his mother's letter falling from his hands as the full weight of his failure crashed over him. What have I done? He was reaching for his phone to call Ava when it rang in his hands. Doctor. Patel's name appeared on the screen, and James answered with a desperation that surprised him. James, thank God. Patel's voice was tight with urgency. You need to get to Northwestern Memorial Hospital immediately. Ava's in premature labor. The world tilted on its axis. What? How? She's only 24 weeks. Her blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels. We had to induce delivery to save her life. She's asking for you, James. She keeps asking for you. James was already moving, grabbing his keys and running for the elevator. I'm on my way. Is Sheer the babies? Just get here fast. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and prayers to a God James wasn't sure he believed in. Please, he begged silently, please don't let me lose them. Please give me a chance to make this right. He burst through the hospital doors and found Dr. Patel waiting for him, her face grave but not hopeless. She's in room 314, she said without preamble. James, I need you to know the babies are very small, very early. We're doing everything we can, but the next few hours are critical. And Avashi's stable for now, but she's terrified, and she needs you. Whatever happened between you two, put it aside. She needs to know you're here, that you're not going anywhere. James didn't need to be told twice. He ran through the corridors, his heart hammering against his ribs, until he reached room 314. Through the small window, he could see Ava on the hospital bed, monitors beeping around her, her face pale with pain and fear. When he opened the door, she looked up, and the relief in her dark eyes nearly brought him to his knees. James, she whispered, reaching for him with a trembling hand. He was beside her in an instant, taking her hand in both of his, pressing kisses to her knuckles as tears streamed down his face. I'm here, he said, his voice breaking. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. I'm so scared, Ava sobbed. The babies, they're too small. What if they don't? Hey, James said firmly, cupping her face in his hands. Look at me. Our babies are fighters. Just like their mother. They're going to be okay. You came, she said wonderingly, as if she hadn't been sure he would. Wild horses couldn't have kept me away. Ava, I. A contraction hit her then, and she gripped his hand so tightly he thought she might break bones. He coached her through it, whispering words of love and encouragement until the pain passed. I got your text. She gasped, when she could speak again. I meant every word, James said, smoothing her hair back from her face. I've been an idiot, Ava. A proud, scared idiot who almost lost the most important thing in his life because I was too afraid to trust you. We can talk about this later, Ava said, but James shook his head. No, I need to say this now, in case he couldn't finish the sentence. I read my mother's letters again. She warned me about this, about letting fear make me controlling. I became my father, Ava. I tried to make decisions for you instead of with you because I was terrified of losing you. Another contraction gripped her, stronger this time. And James felt helpless as he watched her fight through the pain. The babies are coming, she said when it passed. Panic edging her voice. James, what if? Then we'll face it together, he said fiercely. Whatever happens, we face it together. No more hiding, no more controlling, no more making decisions without you. We're partners, Ava. I should have remembered that from the beginning. Dr. Patel entered then with a team of specialists. It's time, she announced. We need to get these babies out before Ava's blood pressure spikes again. The next 2 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. James held Ava's hand through every contraction, whispered words of love and encouragement when she was too exhausted to continue, and prayed harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. When their son was born first, tiny and silent, James felt his heart stop. But then came a weak cry, and Dr. Patel's reassuring voice. He's breathing on his own, small but strong. Their daughter followed minutes later, even smaller than her brother, but with lungs that announced her arrival to the entire floor. They're beautiful, James sobbed, watching the NICU team work on their children. Ava, they're perfect. Ava was crying too, exhausted but radiant with joy and relief. Are they okay? Really okay? They're small, Dr. Patel said honestly, but their vital signs are good. They'll need to stay in the NICU for several weeks, but I'm optimistic. As their babies were wheeled away to the specialized care they needed, James and Ava were finally alone. The room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the sound of their own exhausted breathing. I'm sorry, James said, the words inadequate for the pain he'd caused. I'm so sorry, Ava, for everything, for not trusting you, for trying to control you, for being too afraid and too proud to fight for us properly. I'm sorry too, Ava said softly, for shutting you out, for not answering your calls, for letting my pride keep me from trying to work through this with you. I love you, James said, pressing his forehead against hers. I love you more than my own life, and I promise, I swear to you that I will never try to make decisions for you again. We're partners in this, in everything. I love you too, Ava whispered. So much. When I was in labor, all I could think about was how much I wanted you here, how much I needed you. I'll always be here, James promised. For you, for our children, for whatever comes next. We're a family now, Ava. Nothing will ever change that. They held each other, thin, exhausted parents of premature twins, partners who had nearly lost each other to pride and fear but had found their way back to love. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Weeks in the NICU, sleepless nights, the ongoing work of building a life together. But tonight, they had each other and 2 tiny miracles fighting for life in the next room. What do you want to name them? Ava asked softly. James smiled, thinking of his mother's letters and the wisdom she'd tried to pass down to him. I was thinking Clara for our daughter. It was my mother's middle name. It means light. Clara, Ava repeated, testing the name. I love it. And our son? What about Noah? It means rest and comfort. And he's definitely shown us he's strong. Clara and Noah Carver Thompson, Ava said, and James's heart swelled at the way she'd hyphenated their names, making them truly equal partners, even in this. Perfect, he said, sealing the promise with a gentle kiss. Later, as Ava slept and James kept watch over both her and their babies through the NICU window, he thought about the letters his mother had left him. She'd been right. Love wasn't about control or protection or making decisions for someone else. Love was about trust, partnership, and having the courage to be vulnerable. He'd almost lost everything because he'd forgotten that lesson. But love had given him a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. Their babies were small and would face challenges, but they were alive and fighting. His relationship with Ava had been tested by fire but had emerged stronger and more honest than before. They were going to be okay, all of them, together. Chapter 9. The Healing of Everything. 6 months after Clara and Noah's dramatic entrance into the world, James stood in the NICU for what he hoped would be the final time, watching his daughter reach for his finger with tiny hands that were finally strong enough to maintain a firm grip. "Ready to go home, princess?" he whispered. And Clara gurgled in response, her dark eyes, so much like her mother's, focusing on his face with the intensity that had characterized both twins from their earliest days. Noah, meanwhile, was already dressed in his going-home outfit, a tiny blue onesie that still looked enormous on his small frame. At 6 pounds each, the twins were finally healthy enough to leave the hospital that had been their home since birth. "I can't believe this day is finally here," Ava said softly, settling into the rocking chair where she'd spent countless hours pumping milk and reading to their babies. She looked radiant, despite the exhaustion that came with being the mother of premature twins, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face glowing with the kind of joy that came from having fought for something precious and won. "Believe it," James said, carefully transferring Clara to her arms while he picked up Noah. "Our family is going home." The word family still sent a thrill through him, not just because of their children, but because of what he and Ava had built together in the crucible of those terrifying early months. Their relationship had been tested by fire and emerged not just intact, but stronger and more honest than ever before. The NICU months had taught them both invaluable lessons about partnership. When Noah had faced a setback with his breathing at 2 months old, they'd faced it together, not with James trying to shield Ava from the fear, but with both of them holding each other through the terror and taking turns being strong when the other couldn't be. When Clara had needed surgery to correct a heart murmur at 3 months, Ava had been the one to research every option while James handled the emotional support. Each of them contributing their strengths without ego or competition. "Dr. Patel wants to see us one more time before we leave," Ava said, but her attention was focused on Clara, who was making the soft, cooing sounds that never failed to melt both parents' hearts. The meeting with Dr. Patel was brief but profound. "You two have been extraordinary parents," she said, reviewing the twins' final charts. "Most couples don't survive the stress of a NICU stay, especially not one this long. But you've both grown stronger, and your children have benefited enormously from having parents who were completely united in their care." "We learned some things about ourselves," James said quietly, his hand finding Ava's automatically, "about what really matters." "Speaking of what matters, Dr. Flas 100 from Ardes." Patel smiled. "I have some news that might interest you. The gene therapy trial you both participated in has been such a success that the FDA has fast-tracked it for approval. Your case study is being published in 3 major medical journals, and the treatment will be available to the public within the year." Ava's eyes filled with tears. "That means other families won't have to go through what we went through. Other children won't have to watch their grandparents fade away. It means your love story saved lives, Doctor." Patel said simply, "The data we gathered from your treatment, combined with the documentation of how your emotional bond affected your healing, has revolutionized our understanding of the connection between love and physical recovery." The drive home was surreal. After 6 months of hospital visits and sterile environments, the simple act of carrying their children into their own home felt like a miracle. James had spent weeks preparing for this moment, transforming the nursery from his original vision into something that reflected both their heritage and their hopes. The walls were painted in soft greens and yellows. With murals he'd painted himself depicting scenes from both African-American folklore and Celtic mythologies from both their backgrounds that their children would grow up knowing and treasuring. Grandmother Lillian's rocking chair sat beside the window, reupholstered now and eager to hold her great-grandchildren. Photos of both their families lined the walls, creating a visual legacy of love and resilience. "It's perfect." Ava breathed, settling into her grandmother's chair with Clara, while James placed Noah in his crib. "We're perfect," James corrected. And he meant it not perfect in the sense of flawless, but perfect in the way that two people could be when they'd learned to love, without reservation, trust without fear, and build something together that was greater than either could have achieved alone. The months that followed were a symphony of sleepless nights and profound joy, of learning to be parents while continuing to grow as partners. James had restructured his entire life around their family, working from home most days, so he could share equally in feedings and diaper changes, and the thousand small moments that made up their children's lives. But it was the larger changes that truly revealed how their love had transformed them both. 3 months after bringing the twins home, James made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the business world. Carver Pharmaceuticals would be donating 50% of its profits to establishing free medical clinics in underserved communities, starting with Ava's old neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. This company was built on the principle of healing, he told the board of directors during a tense emergency meeting, his voice steady despite their obvious resistance. But healing shouldn't be a privilege for those who can afford it. My family taught me that love is only meaningful when it extends beyond ourselves. The board members exchanged worried glances, clearly concerned about shareholder reactions and profit margins. James, Henry Sullivan, said carefully, "While we admire your philanthropic instincts, 50% is an enormous commitment. Perhaps we could start with 5%? No, James replied firmly. We're not starting small and hoping to do better someday. We're starting with what's right, and what's right is using our success to heal communities that have been ignored for too long." The first clinic opened 6 months later in a renovated building 3 blocks from where Ava had grown up. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, grandmother Lillian, now completely recovered and sharper than ever, stood beside them, holding Noah while Clara slept peacefully in Ava's arms. "You did this," James whispered to Ava as they watched families from the neighborhood stream through the doors to receive care they'd never been able to afford before. "We did this," Ava corrected. "Together." She was back in medical school now, pursuing her dream of becoming a doctor with James's full support. He'd hired a team of nannies to help with the twins during her clinical rotations. But more often than not, he was the one adjusting his schedule to be with their children, watching him change diapers at 2 a.m. or sing lullabies in his surprisingly gentle voice. Ava fell in love with him all over again every single day. The legal changes they made were symbolic but powerful. James had legally added Thompson as his middle name, so he was now James Thompson Carver, a gesture that honored Ava's heritage and made clear that their union was one of equals. Their children were Clara Lillian Carver Thompson and Noah James Carver Thompson, carrying both family names into the future. "I never thought I'd see the day," grandmother Lillian said one evening, as she watched James teaching Noah to clap, while Ava helped Clara with her first attempts at solid food. "When I was growing up, love like this between different kinds of people, it wasn't impossible, but it sure wasn't easy." "It's still not always easy," Ava admitted, thinking of the occasional stares they still received, the whispered comments about their interracial family. "But it's worth fighting for." "Every day," James agreed, moving to help clean food off Clara's face. "Every challenge, every obstacle, every person who doesn't understand, it's all worth it for this." The most unexpected healing came when James received a phone call from his estranged sister, Sophie, whom he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. She'd seen the news articles about their family, about the clinics, about how her brother had transformed from a cold CEO into a devoted father and husband. "I want to meet them," she said simply. When James answered the phone, "Your children, your wife. I want to know the people who helped you find your heart again." The reunion was tentative at first, but Sophie took one look at the twins and melted completely. "They look just like Mom," she whispered, holding Clara while Noah slept against James's chest. "She would have loved them so much." "She would have loved Ava," James said, watching his wife laugh with his sister over baby stories. "She always said I'd know the right woman when I found someone who could see my heart despite all the walls I'd built around it. And Ava saw it on the first day we met. She looked right through all my defenses and loved me anyway." Sophie stayed for a week, helping with the twins and getting to know the sister-in-law who had transformed her brother from an isolated workaholic into a man who painted nursery murals and sang lullabies. When she left, it was with promises to visit regularly and with tears in her eyes. "You found it," she told James as she hugged him goodbye. "The kind of love Mom always wanted for us, the kind that heals everything it touches." And it was true. Their love had rippled outward like stones thrown into still water, creating circles of healing that extended far beyond their immediate family. The medical clinics were just the beginning. James had also established scholarship funds for students from underserved communities, while Ava had started a support group for families dealing with genetic diseases. Their twins, now 8 months old and thriving, were growing up in a world where love was the family's primary value. Clara had inherited her mother's fierce intelligence and her father's artistic sensitivity, while Noah showed signs of having Ava's compassionate nature and James's determined strength. "Do you think they'll remember this?" Ava asked one evening as they sat in their rooftop garden, watching the sunset paint Chicago's skyline in shades of gold while the twins played on a blanket between them. "Remember what?" "This feeling, this sense of being completely loved, completely safe, completely valued for who they are." James considered the question seriously. "Maybe not consciously, but I think it becomes part of them, you know? The way your grandmother's love became part of you. The way my mother's love sustained me, even after she died. Love like this, it gets into your bones. It becomes the foundation for everything else they build." "Good," Ava said, reaching for his hand. "Because I want them to expect this kind of love. I want them to know that anything less isn't worth settling for." "They'll know," James promised, bringing her hand to his lips, "because they'll see it every day in how we love each other and how we love them." As if summoned by their conversation, Noah crawled over to James and pulled himself up to standing, wobbling slightly but determined to stay upright. Clara, not to be outdone, followed her brother's example and managed to take 2 unsteady steps before falling backward onto her diaper-cushioned bottom. "Did you see that?" Ava laughed, scooping Clara up for congratulations. "She's going to be walking before her first birthday, just like her mother," James said, settling Noah in his lap, determined to reach her goals, no matter what obstacles get in her way. They stayed in the garden until the twins fell asleep against their parents' chests, the city lights twinkling below them like earthbound stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Ava had exams to study for, James had board meetings to attend, and the twins would undoubtedly find new ways to test their parents' patience and endurance. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of their love, their healthy children, their beautiful home, their transformed lives, James and Ava felt only gratitude. They had found each other across the divide of illness and desperation, had built something beautiful from the raw materials of pain and hope, and had created a love story that was healing everyone it touched. The best was yet to come. Chapter 10. Sacred Vows of Forever. 1 year later, the Carver Medical Center's rooftop garden had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, but it was a fairy tale, grounded in the reality of love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than ever. White roses and baby's breath intertwined with jasmine and gardenia, filling the evening air with a fragrance that spoke of new beginnings and eternal promises. String lights twinkled overhead like captured stars, while the Chicago skyline provided a breathtaking backdrop as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. James stood at the improvised altar, a simple arch of flowers that he and Ava had designed together, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that somehow managed to make him look both elegant and approachable. His hands were steady now, completely free of the tremors that had once betrayed his illness, but they trembled slightly with anticipation as he waited for the woman who had saved his life in every possible way. The guests were a beautiful mixture of worlds coming together. Medical professionals who had treated them both during their darkest hours, James's business associates who had watched him transform from a cold CEO into a man driven by love and purpose, and residents from Ava's old neighborhood who had become family through the clinics and programs their love had inspired. Sophie sat in the front row, holding baby Noah, who was babbling happily at all the pretty lights, while Clara toddled between the seated guests, charming everyone with her bright smile and fearless personality. Dr. Patel stood ready to officiate, having requested the honor of marrying the couple whose love story had not only saved their own lives, but had revolutionized her understanding of the healing power of human connection. She wore a simple blue dress and a smile that spoke of her deep affection for the extraordinary pair who had become so much more than patients, friends and family. "Dr. Patel began, her voice carrying clearly across the garden, "We gather here tonight not just to witness a wedding, but to celebrate a love story that has literally changed lives. James and Ava's journey to this moment has been one of healing, growth, and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches." At the back of the garden, the doors opened, and Grandmother Lillian appeared, radiant in a dress of deep purple silk that complemented her silver hair perfectly. At 85, she moved with the grace and strength of someone half her age, the gene therapy having given her not just more time, but more quality in that time. On her arm was the most beautiful bride anyone present had ever seen. Ava's wedding dress was a work of art that honored both tradition and her own unique style. Made of ivory silk that seemed to glow in the golden light, it featured delicate beadwork that told the story of her heritage. Patterns inspired by African textiles interwoven with Celtic knots, creating something entirely new and beautiful, just like the love she and James had built together. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo adorned with fresh flowers, and her grandmother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing Lillian had ever owned, gleamed at her throat. But it was the expression on Ava's face that truly captivated everyone present. She was luminous with joy, her dark eyes shining with tears of happiness as she looked at James waiting for her at the altar. This was the face of a woman who had found her soulmate, who was about to pledge her life to her other half, who knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. James felt his own eyes fill with tears as he watched her approach. Every step she took toward him felt like a miracle. Every smile that crossed her face was a gift he'd never thought he'd deserve. When she reached the altar and Grandmother Lillian placed Ava's hand in his, he had to close his eyes for a moment to steady himself against the overwhelming wave of gratitude and love that threatened to bring him to his knees. "Dearly beloved," Dr. Patel continued, "James and Ava have chosen to write their own vows for this ceremony. James, would you like to begin?" James turned to face Ava fully, taking both her hands in his as he spoke the words he'd been composing in his heart since the day they met. "Ava," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "when I walked into that treatment room 18 months ago, I was dying not just from the disease in my body, but from the loneliness in my soul. I had convinced myself that I was meant to face the world alone, that love was something other people experienced while I watched from the sidelines of my own life." He paused, his thumb tracing over her wedding ring finger, where he would soon place the symbol of their eternal commitment. "Then you walked into my office, and suddenly I could breathe again. You saw through all my walls and defenses to the man I'd forgotten I could be. You loved me not despite my brokenness, but because you understood that broken people aren't unfixable, they're just waiting for the right person to help them heal." Ava's tears were flowing freely now, but her smile was radiant as James continued. "You taught me that love isn't about protecting someone from the world, it's about facing the world together. You taught me that being a partner means trusting your other half to be strong, not trying to control them to keep them safe. You taught me that the best fathers are made not from perfection, but from the determination to love better than they were loved." He glanced at their children Noah, now reaching for the flowers, while Clara had discovered the fascinating game of peekaboo with James's sister. "Today, I promise to love you through every storm and celebrate with you in every season of joy. I promise to be your partner in all things, never your protector or your controller, but your equal and your champion. I promise to father our children with the tenderness you've shown me that love can hold, and to build a life with you that honors both our dreams and creates new ones we haven't even imagined yet." His voice broke slightly as he spoke his final words. "I promise to love you not just for this lifetime, but for whatever comes after, because my soul recognized yours the moment we met, and it will recognize you again wherever we find each other next. You are my healing, my hope, my home, and my forever. I love you, Ava Thompson, with everything I am and everything I'll ever be." The garden was completely silent, except for the soft sounds of tears being wiped away and hearts breaking open with the beauty of such profound love. Even the twins seemed to sense the sacred nature of the moment, both of them sitting quietly in the arms of their beloved adopted aunts and uncles. "Dr." Patel nodded to Ava, who took a shaky breath before beginning her own vows. "James," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her tears, "I used to believe that love was something I couldn't afford. I thought it was a luxury for people who didn't have to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, who didn't have to fight for every dream and every hope." She squeezed his hands, drawing strength from the contact as she continued. "But you taught me that love isn't something that makes you weak, it's something that makes you brave. You showed me that the right person doesn't add to your burdens, they help you carry them. You proved that love doesn't make you smaller, it makes you everything you were always meant to be." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke from her heart. "You saw my dreams and didn't just support them, You helped me build them into something bigger and more beautiful than I ever imagined. You looked at my family and didn't see people to tolerate, but people to treasure. You took my hand and said, "Let's heal the world together," and then you actually meant it. The crowd murmured appreciation as Ava gestured toward the medical center below them, where their first free clinic had saved hundreds of lives in its first year of operation. Today, I promise to be your soft place to land when the world is harsh, and your loudest cheering section when you're conquering new dreams. I promise to trust you with my heart, even when fear whispers that love this good can't last. I promise to mother our children with the fierce protection and gentle guidance that you've shown me true love provides. She paused, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the garden. I promise to love you not just in this lifetime, but in every lifetime where souls choose their partners. You are my miracle, my strength, my peace, and my passion. You are the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying. I love you, James Thompson Carver, with my whole heart, my whole soul, and my whole life. Dr. Patel was crying now, too, along with nearly everyone in attendance. The love between James and Ava was so palpable, so pure and powerful, that it seemed to radiate outward and touch everyone present. James and Ava, Dr. Patel said, her voice reverent with the weight of the moment. You have spoken vows that honor not just your love for each other, but your commitment to building a love that heals everyone it touches. It is my profound honor to pronounce you husband and wife. James, you may kiss your bride. The kiss that followed was everything their love story had been. Gentle and passionate, tender and fierce, a promise and a celebration all at once. It was the kiss of two souls who had found their home in each other, two hearts that beat as one. Two people who had learned that true love really could conquer anything. As they broke apart, both laughing through their tears, a small commotion at the edge of the garden caught their attention. Clara had escaped from Sophie's arms and was toddling determinedly toward her parents, her chubby arms outstretched and her face beaming with delight. Noah, not to be outdone, had squirmed out of Dr. Patel's assistant's grasp and was crawling rapidly across the flower-strewn aisle. The sight of their children rushing toward them was so perfect, so exactly right, that James and Ava burst into laughter, even as fresh tears streamed down their faces. They scooped up their babies, Clara giggling as James spun her around, while Noah clapped his hands in excitement from Ava's arms. The photographer captured the moment perfectly, a family of four silhouetted against the Chicago sunset, their love so evident and so pure that the image would later become one of the most shared wedding photos in the city's history. It was a picture that spoke of love that had overcome every obstacle, of dreams that had come true through courage and determination, of a family built on the foundation of souls that were meant to be together. 57 years later, that same rooftop garden, now legendary as the site of Chicago's most famous love story, was once again filled with flowers and laughter. But this time, the celebration was for James and Ava's 60th wedding anniversary, and the guest list had grown to include children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, whose very existence was a testament to the power of love that had started with two broken people finding healing in each other. James, now 87, sat in a comfortable chair beside Ava, now 85. Their hair silver, but their eyes still bright with the love that had sustained them through 6 decades of marriage. His hand rested over hers in the same gentle way it had during their first treatment sessions, and her smile when she looked at him was the same radiant expression that had taken his breath away when she walked down the aisle. "Tell us the story again, Grandma Ava," said their youngest great-granddaughter, a precocious 5-year-old with James's gray eyes and Ava's determined chin. "Which story, sweetheart?" Ava asked, though she already knew the answer. "The story of how you and Grandpa James saved each other." Clara and Noah, now 61, and the proud parents and grandparents of their own large families, exchanged amused glances. They'd heard this story thousands of times, but it never got old. "Well," James began, his voice still strong despite his age, "it all started when your grandmother was the bravest woman in the world, and I was too scared to know what love really meant. But then you learned," piped up another grandchild. "Then we learned," Ava corrected gently, "that love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other every day, even when things get difficult. Especially when things get difficult," James added, squeezing her hand. As the sun set over Chicago once again, painting the sky in the same shades of gold and rose that had blessed their wedding day. 4 generations of the Carver-Thompson family gathered close to hear the story that had shaped all their lives. It was a story of love that had literally saved lives, changed a city, and proved that 2 people who choose each other completely can indeed change the world. "The most important thing to remember," Ava said softly, her voice carrying to every member of their beautiful, diverse, thriving family, "is that true love. The kind that lasts forever isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose every single day to build together. And it's something that grows," James added, looking around at all the faces that existed because he and Ava had chosen to love courageously. "It starts with 2 people, but if you do it right, it spreads to heal everyone. It touches." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, James and Ava Carver-Thompson sat surrounded by the legacy of their love, a legacy of children who knew they were treasured, of communities that had been transformed, of lives that had been saved, and of a love story that would inspire generations to come. They had kept every promise they made to each other on that magical evening 60 years ago. They had loved through every storm and celebrated every joy. They had been partners in all things, parents who loved with wisdom and tenderness, and living proof that love really could conquer all. And they weren't finished yet. As long as they had breath in their bodies and love in their hearts, James and Ava would continue building the miracle they'd started in a hospital treatment, Ruma, love so pure and powerful that it transformed everything it touched, forever and always, exactly as they'd promised.